Welcome back to Ancient Realms. Last time, we left Osiris sealed inside a pillar, his kingdom believing him gone. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, go do that first. Today, we finish that story, but not the way you'd expect. No easy miracle until the 20th century, and the Egyptians understood 1,000 years earlier. What happens next isn't something I can tell you the way it deserves. So for this part, I'll step aside and let the story speak for itself the way it's been told for 4,000 years.
He was sealed inside a pillar, holding up the roof of a stranger's home. His kingdom believed him gone. His brother sat on his throne. Most versions of this story rush to the miracle. A goddess finds him, brings him back. The end. But that's not what happened. What Isis was about to do had a name. Today, we call it post-traumatic growth. Not going back to who you were, becoming whole in a shape you never expected. This is part 2. This is the reassembly. Isis did not wait for news to reach her. She went looking for it. While Egypt mourned a king it believed had simply vanished, and while Set settled comfortably into a throne that was never his, Isis left the palace behind and began a search that the oldest texts describe not in days, but in years. She traveled the length of the Nile Delta first, questioning fishermen, farmers, anyone who might have seen a chest carried by the current. When the river offered nothing, she went further, south along the coast, through foreign villages where her language was not spoken, and her grief meant nothing to strangers who had their own losses to carry. There is a detail in the old accounts that is easy to skip past, but should not be. Isis did not search as a goddess, wielding power. She searched as someone stripped of it, asking, waiting, being turned away, trying again. The texts describe children mocking her in the streets of foreign towns, unaware of who she was.
This is, perhaps, the least mythical part of an otherwise fantastical story. And it may be the most important. Because grief, in almost every account we have of it, ancient or modern, rarely announces itself with grandeur. It looks like this instead. An ordinary, exhausting, repetitive search for something that may never be found. Continued anyway.
It starts again, continuing like this.
Truly an option. Eventually, the search led her to Byblos, a foreign port city far from Egypt, where the local people spoke of a remarkable tree that had grown around a hidden treasure, and of a pillar cut from that same tree now standing in the king's palace. Isis did not announce herself. According to several versions of the story, she took work in the royal household. Some accounts say as a nursemaid to the queen's child, and waited patiently for the right moment to approach the truth she already suspected. When she finally revealed who she was and what she believed the pillar contained, the reaction of the Byblos court was not disbelief, it was recognition. They had sensed all along that something about that column was different, heavier somehow than its size should allow. Grief, it turns out, has a way of being felt even by those who cannot name its source. The king ordered the pillar cut open, and there, inside the wood that had unknowingly held up his own palace for months, was Osiris. Isis carried her husband's body back toward Egypt, believing the worst was over. She was wrong. Set discovered the body had been recovered, and this time, his response was not patience. It was fury. The kind that comes when someone realizes their carefully built plan has been undone by a woman they never considered a real threat. He didn't simply kill Osiris a second time. He tore the body into 14 pieces and scattered them across the entire length of the Nile, each fragment left in a different location. Some accounts say specifically so that no single search, no matter how determined, could ever recover them all.
This detail matters more than it first appears. Set was not simply trying to prevent a resurrection. He was trying to make the very act of searching feel pointless, to turn hope itself into exhaustion.
Anyone who has tried to rebuild something after a devastating loss will recognize this particular cruelty. It is not always the initial wound that breaks a person. Sometimes it is the moment they realize how much scattered, exhausting work still lies ahead of them, with no guarantee any of it will be enough.
Isis did not do this alone. Her sister Nephthys joined her, and together they began the second search, this one even harder than the first, because now there was no single chest to find, only fragments hidden across an entire river system in places no map could predict.
The ancient hymns describe this part of the story with a kind of repetition that feels almost ritualistic. One piece here, one piece there, each one recovered through searching, through grief, through refusing to stop. She found 13 of the 14 pieces.
Modern trauma specialists have a specific term for what this kind of experience teaches us: irreversible loss within recovery. It is the understanding that healing does not mean reversing what happened. It means learning to live as someone who is whole, but not identical to who they were before the loss occurred.
Isis embodies this principle almost perfectly, 4,000 years before anyone gave it a clinical name. She did not wait for perfect restoration. She gathered what could be gathered and prepared to work with what remained. The 14th piece, his phallus, had been swallowed by a fish in the river, the one fragment that no amount of searching would ever recover. There is something almost unbearably honest in this detail, and it is worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Isis did not pretend otherwise. She did not deny the piece was gone. Instead, she did something far more interesting. She used her own power to fashion what was missing. Not a perfect replica, not a restoration, a replacement built by her own hands from her own resourcefulness to complete what could not be recovered any other way. With the pieces gathered and the missing fragment replaced, Isis performed the final act, one described across Egyptian art and text for thousands of years afterward. She transformed herself into a bird, and with her wings, fanned breath back into a body that had been dead for so long. Some versions describe her hovering directly over him, wings beating in a rhythm meant to mimic the breath of life itself. Osiris opened his eyes. Isis conceived a son, Horus, who would grow to reclaim the throne Set had stolen and restore order to Egypt in his father's name. The resurrection, in other words, was never really about bringing Osiris back to rule again. It was about creating a continuation, proof that what was broken could still produce something whole, even if that wholeness took an entirely different form than anyone expected. Osiris did not return to rule Egypt. He became something else instead. King of the underworld, judge of the dead, the figure every soul would eventually stand before to be weighed and understood. For thousands of years, Egyptians did not see this as a diminished fate. They saw it as a promotion into something sacred, proof that a life interrupted by betrayal could still arrive somewhere meaningful, even if the destination was never the one originally planned.
Perhaps that is the real inheritance of this story. Not that love conquers everything, not that broken things return to exactly what they were, but that wholeness, real and lasting, can be built from what remains, patiently, imperfectly, by people who refuse to stop searching for each other. 4,000 years later, we are still telling this story because we still need to hear it.
Osrone. He got something else. A new purpose, proof that broken things can still become whole. Not the same, but whole. If this story meant something to you, tap like. It tells YouTube to show this to someone who needs it too. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. There's a lot more of this waiting for you. Next time, we turn to Isis herself, not as a supporting character, but as the center of her own story. Until then, I'm Alora. This has been Ancient Realms.